Hello there, and welcome into another edition of Informed Utah, part of the JayMac podcast. Today, I want to bring you some very important information as we speak with Dr. Leisha Nolan. She is the Utah State Epidemiologist. Directly from her about so many of the claims that we have seen out there. So much of the information that comes through, and we're like, is that true? Is that true? Who do we believe? And I hope that you will listen to what she has to say and really consider it as from a credible source. I mean, I know sometimes we see the reports on CNN or ABC or somewhere else, and we're like, oh, you can't trust them. Well, I believe you can trust Dr. Leisha Nolan, and it's why it is that it feels like there's been a change in belief or a flip-flop, as some of our state elected officials have called it. And we dive into whether or not it's a flip-flop or is it just new information. We also talk about the Delta variant and how contagious it really is. And are there any other variants on the horizon? We also talked about what you should do if you've had the virus. Should you get vaccinated? And if you've been vaccinated, do you need to wear a mask? So we dove into all of those questions. I hope that you'll really listen to what she has to say, and I hope that you will consider getting vaccinated if you have not already. There is a mountain of reasons to do it, and very few not to. Of course, work with your medical professional and your doctor to make the best choice for you. Well, Doctor, it's a real pleasure to have you on. I'm really excited to talk with you and help get some information out there to the people of Utah about where we're currently at with COVID and with the Delta variant in our community. One of the things that I hear so much about is why are we going backwards? Why I even hear this word flip-flopping. Why have the guidelines changed?
Yeah, I think it's been frustrating for everyone, including the public health officials. But it really comes down to, unfortunately, the virus changes and we have to change to address that. Back when CDC made the recommendation about that people can stop masking if they were vaccinated, that was when we predominantly had what is called the alpha variant of the virus circulating. And that variant was what we were used to. It's what we'd already addressed for quite a number of months. And it was starting to taper down. Unfortunately, the virus slightly got ahead of us and a new mutant came around, a new variant, and that variant is much easier to transmit. And that's why the guidance came out that we should be now wearing masks when people are in high transmission areas. Right. So really, what appears to be a flip-flop is really appropriate guidance. It's using the best evidence we have and the best information we have and making recommendations based on that. And the virus is forcing us to make changes.
Yeah, so new information about a new variant. Pretty simple, right?
Correct. It's simple, but maybe not so simple, but yes.
Well, I like to keep it as simple as possible, right? Because people are thinking, wait, you told us this about COVID. Now you're telling us this. How do we trust you? What they're not hearing in the middle part there is that was the alpha. This is now the delta. And so that's why I think it's simple. But the messaging is getting convoluted. And that's why I'm glad you're joining us.
Yes, I'm happy to clarify that. And I think it is. It's frustrating for people who aren't looking at the science and aren't looking at all the changes. They just hear one statement or another. But yeah, this is based on what is changing around us and what the virus is doing that we need to adapt to.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I've been talking about this a lot. We have a decent vaccination rate in the state of Utah, but the infection rate is climbing so much. That tells us how contagious this Delta variant is, and it really makes me think, how would things be if we didn't have the vaccination right now?
That's a really good point. I think it would be really extreme if we didn't have the vaccination. Luckily, we do have a large part of our population protected because of the vaccine. The studies that have been starting to come out show that this virus is 1,000 times more transmissible. Like, there's just huge amount of virus in people who are infected. And we know that one person will pass it on to about 4 to 5 people, whereas with the original one, you'd only pass it to 2. So we know that it's just much easier to pass this virus on. So thank goodness we do have the vaccine out there. And you're right, Utah, we have a good number of people vaccinated, but I think we could always do more. The more people we can protect with vaccine, the better.
Yeah, and I think we're also lucky in the fact that the vaccine is still helping with the Delta variant, right? We haven't had to change the vaccine in that regard.
Yeah, you're completely right. There's been a number of studies that have looked at how well is the vaccine doing against the Delta variant, and it's still protecting people against hospitalization and death. That's really what we want to make sure happens, right? We want to make sure this virus does not put people into the hospital, and the vaccines are doing that. Here in Utah, we're seeing really good protection of our people, and the vaccines are working great.
That's fantastic. I hear and I see stories about other variants, Delta Plus. I'm like, That's not an airline Sky Miles. That's another variant. Are there concerns out there? I know you guys are watching. Is there anything on the horizon that you're aware of?
Yeah, right now, none of the variants or the variants of the variants looks extra concerning. But the truth is, if we continue to have transmission, the virus will continue to mutate, and that will make new variants. And the whole goal of the virus is to find a way to infect more people. So the more we have transmission, it gives the virus just opportunities to change, and eventually something new will arise. So we do need to keep an eye on it. We do need to make sure that there's nothing more aggressive coming onto the horizon. Right now, we don't see anything like that, but it's not a guarantee it won't happen in the future.
Now let's talk about children initially, or kids in high school that age. Initially, the thought was they're not catching it as much, or if they do catch it, they're asymptomatic. And now the Delta variant is changing some of that. How does the Delta variant affect the youth among us?
Yeah, and you're right. The original strains, we saw most kids were either mild or asymptomatic infection. But at the same time, we do have to remember there's been hundreds of kids here in Utah who've been hospitalized with COVID. So it's not a mild disease for everyone. The Delta variant does look like it actually causes a very similar disease. And so the ratio of how many kids get infected to how many have to go to the hospital actually looks pretty similar. The problem is that so many kids are getting infected. It just means a lot of kids have to go to the hospital. And that's what other states are seeing, where they're filling up their pediatric hospitals just because they have so many cases. When you have that many cases, a small percentage of a lot of cases ends up being a lot of people in the hospital. And so that's what we're seeing. We definitely are seeing a number of kids in our hospitals. And we want to keep that from get vaccinated if they can, so we can protect our kids. We can get our teens vaccinated and protect them directly. And then starting to wear masks when you're in high crowded areas again, I think that's really appropriate, because we know this new variant can be spread so easily.
Yeah, and so I know that was a recommendation. It hasn't been mandated by the states, but within schools, your recommendation is that they wear a mask.
I mean, I think it's the safest approach. Families who want to make sure their kids stay safe, and also that their kids don't bring it home to them, really, it's appropriate to have those children wear masks at school. After vaccination, that's our best protection.
One of the other things I keep sharing with people, and I'd like your feedback on this, is that we tend to act like we know all of the ramifications or long-term effects of this virus. We don't. We know about long haul, and we're still catch it and get your immunity or whatever. We don't know what this does to your system 2 years from now even, or 5 years from now. So you're really rolling the dice in that regard.
Yeah, you're completely correct. I think we're learning things every day, right? And something surprising happens, it seems like every month. We're like, oh, did not realize that was a problem. And so I think it is. Right now, we aren't sure what the long-term impact of having this infection is. And so I think avoiding it when you can is really the best approach, instead of taking it casual and not sure what's going to happen later.
Yeah, and you already mentioned that the more people that aren't vaccinated, the more opportunity there is for this thing to mutate. And if it mutates outside of the current vaccine, we're going to go back to square one on this thing.
Right. Yeah. And so it is. That's one really important reason to get people vaccinated and to try to stop transmission however we can, is just to keep it from allowing that virus to mutate more and create some new, worse variant. We really don't want that to happen. And as you say, it's possible that there could be a variant in the future that would get around the vaccine protection. And we really would prefer not to get there.
Yeah. Now, doctor, what would you say to those people who are concerned about the science behind the vaccine? I hear people saying, well, it only has emergency use approval. It hasn't been tested the same way. There's a lot of this going around. Can you bring some clarity to that?
Yeah, I think the other one that you don't mention that a lot of people say is it's developed so fast. And I think that is an incorrect idea. I mean, we've had vaccines for over 100 years. We've been learning how to do vaccines, and it's small step by small step. It's just like we didn't suddenly have cell phones. We had many different phones that led up to it. Mm-hmm. Same with this vaccine. There's been vaccines for years, and we're just building on our knowledge. So this vaccine was something that scientists have been understanding how this worked for a long time. We now have millions of people have received these vaccines, and we can look at what effects it has on those people. There was a recent study where they just looked at the severe side effects in these vaccines, and it's significantly lower than almost non-existent compared to the effects of what would happen in the same population if they were exposed to COVID. So these vaccines are very well studied, but because we've given them to so many people, and we are continuing to collect the data, we're continuing to watch for any concerning signs, and so far there haven't been.
All right, very good. General guidelines for everybody out there. Well, and I guess the other thing I'd ask, if I've been vaccinated, can I be free and loose out there? Do I have to wear a mask? Do I have to wear...
Yeah, I think 2 months ago it would be slightly a different answer, right? But now with Delta, I think it is something where it's reasonable to take precautions when you're in crowded areas, even if you are vaccinated. We know that there have been breakthrough infections. We always expected breakthrough infections. There's no such thing as a perfect vaccine. But we now know with this Delta variant that there appears to be breakthrough infections where that person can actually transmit it onward. So before we thought when you were vaccinated, you can't transmit it on, but Delta looks like it's probably changing that. And so it's reasonable to just take the precaution of, if you're in some place crowded where you have a lot of people, to try to wear a mask. And there is also the fact that I think a lot of us can say we haven't had a cold for a year and a half, right? So this whole is on many levels. So continuing things that really are good practice, like washing hands and staying home when you're sick, are great for all of us beyond COVID. But wearing a mask when you're in crowded places is a reasonable approach right now for people who are vaccinated.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about those who have had COVID and they're like, I've had it, I'm immune, I'm good, I don't need to worry about the vaccine?
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? Unfortunately, there's been a number of people evaluating this, and prior infection is somewhat protective, but it's not as protective as the vaccine. So the recommendation is, even if you've had infection, go and get the vaccine. So you get that real true boost that your immune system really has been it's essentially we're training your immune system to fight off infection. So make sure your immune system has the best training it can, and that would be the vaccine, even if you have had the infection. And one thing is, probably most people in Utah had the infection with the original variant, the Alpha variant, and that's the Delta variant is going to be different. So it's important to get every level of protection you can.
Great point. Is there anything else, Doctor, that you'd like to express to Utahns about where we're at with fighting this virus?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all got so happy the last few months when it's almost back to normal, and it's sad to have to sort of start the fight again. But unfortunately, we need to. This is a fight that we'll have to keep going at for a while. But trying the best to protect you and your family, everybody. There's great options. The vaccines are really great, and doing that so you can get everybody in your family who can get the vaccine protected is really great for you and everyone in your community. And then, as we talked about, wearing masks when you're in crowded places to just try to, we can stop this sooner than later.
Yeah, and stop it from mutating. One other question that just came to mind, hospital capacity. How are we doing with that? And is that an ongoing concern right now?
Yeah, it's a very significant concern. I think probably if you look at our dashboard, the Utah dashboard for COVID, you'll see we keep reporting numbers that it's about 88% filled, 85% filled. The issue is that we're actually having a very hard time finding people to staff these hospital beds. All the different hospital systems have multiple openings where they're looking for nurses, they're looking for doctors to help staff those ICU beds or the general hospital beds. So actually, the available beds that have staff to take care of you is actually smaller than that. We probably are 95, 98% full, which is well beyond where we ever want to be. We don't want to have our hospitals that full because it's just, we don't have ability to deal with emergencies. And so that is something we're really concerned about. We want to make sure these cases don't keep rising, because if they do, our hospitals are not going to be able to help people either with COVID or with a car accident or cancer. We're just overwhelming the system. So unfortunately, we are back to that point, and that's another reason to really try to get things under control as much as we can.
Well, great information, Doctor. Thank you for what you do. I know this has been a long battle. I know for you and for our healthcare workers, I'm sure they, more than anybody else, were hoping that they were going to see a break to this. And at least in the short term, it looks like that's not going to happen.
Yeah, you're right. It's been a long haul, but thank you for getting this information out to everyone, and happy to talk with you all.
Thank you so much, Doctor.
Yep. Have a good day.
Once again, I want to thank Dr. Lecia Nolan, Utah State Epidemiologist, for joining us, as you can tell, and our state medical professionals. And when you hear that information about our hospital bed capacity and that we're bringing in workers to try and support the people who are hospitalized, and how this really puts everybody at risk if they're in a car accident or if they have some other illness that they have to deal with. And we're not the only ones facing. State of Texas is putting off all elective surgeries, and how they're bringing in temporary labor from out of state to fight the same problem. Just the Delta variant is how important it is that we each do our part. I feel that part of patriotism is making the choice that best impacts your country in a positive way. So forget about all that talk about mandates and everything else. What can you do to keep your country's economy going? What can you do to keep the health of your nation strong? What can you do if you love the state of Utah to support your fellow Utahns? We're all in this together. And I think one of the things that really stood out to me is the idea that if there are enough of us who aren't vaccinated, we are giving a place for this variant and the virus to mutate and to grow. And that's one of the reasons why we're going backwards right now. We don't want to go backwards. We want to go forwards. So the more of us that get vaccinated, the less opportunity there is for this virus to grow and to mutate. Thanks again to Dr. Lecia Nolan. I hope you found this information viable, and I hope that you'll share it. Please take a minute and become a patron of this podcast so that I can continue to bring this information to you. Go ahead and go to my website, jaymcfarland.com, and become a one-time donor or a monthly donor, and that will really help me bring this to you every single day. Thanks again. Have a wonderful day.